The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Nanaimo's northern gateway could look very different in 20 years. The city is refining its plan for the Woodgrove area and aims to add much denser housing to an area currently covered in concrete and chain stores. I spoke with Kasia Biegun to dig in to how things could change.
My name is Kasia Biegun, and I work for the City of Nanaimo in the Community Planning Department. So I look at the long-range vision for Nanaimo and how growth will occur over that time.
And you have been focusing in on the Woodgrove area of town. Can you tell me, what are you hoping to do? What are you hoping to figure out with that part of town?
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build off the amazing work and what we heard from the community in 2022 with City Plan Nanaimo Reimagined. That's a really large visioning document for all of Nanaimo. And in there, we heard from the community that they would like to see Woodgrove transform into what we like to call a complete community. And this is planning jargon for just a really great place where people want to live, they want to visit, they want to work, they want to spend time. And our plan right now is to determine how do we get that to come to fruition when redevelopment happens.
Now, before we get too far into our conversation, I think it's important to tell people exactly what the area we're talking about is. Obviously, you hear Woodgrove area, you're going to think of the Woodgrove Center. And if you take a look at the map of this area on the reports, it's really a heavy commercial area. Things like the Woodgrove Center, the Costco, the Superstore, those are all kind of around the boundaries of this area. There's not a ton of housing or really anything that isn't commercial space in there. What do you think people need to know about the area right now and how it compares to that vision you just described?
That's a really good point. So the study area encompasses close to 50 properties. So it's quite a large area. And that boundary was defined through city plan and what we like to call our Woodgrove Secondary Urban Center. So this is one of 6 urban centers that we have proposed, downtown being our primary one, and then additional 6. And one of those is Woodgrove. And that boundary is determined to help define how to really create complete community through various properties, not just one. And yes, many people do believe it's just the Woodgrove Center, but the scope of the area is quite large, everywhere from Superstore to the Costco to residential properties to the north. And overall, this area is a regional center. It attracts not only residents of Nanaimo, but it attracts residents from the District of Lantzville and the Regional District of Nanaimo and beyond. And so, unlike other urban centers, we're really looking at a larger scope. And we're looking to see how to transform it because right now it really is known as an area that is dominated by chain retailers, as the baseline findings are in their phase 1 report that just came out, and how to really transform into a mixed-use center. That's really what complete community is a mixed-use center where you have a mix of retail on the ground floor with residential above, or you have standalone residential as well. And you offer a mix of amenities and places that the residents and the visitors want to stay and enjoy.
The report calls for a huge transformation of this area. I just want to read out some of the facts for context. So right now, there are 6 units of housing per hectare. That's the density of the area. The target is 200 units per hectare. To achieve that level of density, you'll need 18,000 new units of housing just in the Woodgrove area. For context, in the entire city of Nanaimo in 2021, there were 43,000 units of housing in total. So you're saying we need 18,000 new units just in this small kind of square around the Woodgrove Center. How on earth do we get there? What's the timeline for when we would hope that would happen?
So this is a target of 200 units per hectare. This is a new approach that the city is taking that was built into city plan. And this is a target across all of the urban centers, not just the Woodgrove. And it's a target. So that means 200 units per hectare across all 6 of them, like I mentioned. We can maybe get developments that are significantly below that, some that are above that. But generally, that 200 units per hectare came from looking at other communities and what their complete community's overall density was per unit per hectare. So although it is 18,000 units, we don't need to achieve 18,000 units. It's just a general target to try to achieve that vision. And this vision is over 30 years. And depending on how the market plays out and how quickly the growth happens, this is a plan that should development happen, we know what the community would like to see. We know what the developers are expected to provide as part of redevelopment and an overall vision for how to get there.
The report also says that the need would be for about 35% of new units that are being developed to be non-market units. And currently in the Woodgrove area right now, there are, according to the report, exactly 0 units of non-market rental housing. How can we change that as a city?
That's correct. So that 35% comes from our housing needs report that recently got updated in 2024. And that is through the new provincial housing legislation to look at what are their housing needs for our community. And as part of that work, we are looking at what's called inclusionary zoning regulations, as well as density bonusing, so that when redevelopment, if it were to occur, be it in Woodgrove or anywhere across the city, is there an opportunity to require a certain percentage of those units to be non-market, or also known as affordable housing. So staff are currently working with our colleagues in current planning to determine how do we actually achieve that, especially in the Woodgrove area.
Right now, there are a couple of thousand, just over 3,000 new units in the works for the area. The vast majority of those are on what's now the Green Thumb nursery site. So if you're driving up the highway in town, on the right, you'll see the nursery, and there's a project for a couple of thousand units of housing in the works, in the pipeline. Are any of the units in that going to be non-market?
So that also known as the Bowers District, or Green Thumb, that is currently going through a rezoning application. And yes, there are discussions regarding trying to secure some non-market units as part of that redevelopment.
And we can't have a conversation about the Woodgrove area without people thinking about the anchor maybe of that, the Woodgrove Mall. When this report was being made, we maybe didn't have the news about, say, the Hudson's Bay Company. There was news that the Foot Locker in the mall is closing as well this week. If you walk through it, you'll see a few vacant storefronts. If people are thinking, oh, I don't know about the future of big commercial retail, when you're working in the city planning department, how does that factor in? What does the mall and the mall's potential future mean to you?
Well, for us, it's really important that we have a vibrant retail environment. And generally what we found from the report is the vacancy rate is generally quite low for the area. But that doesn't mean that the market in relation to retail isn't shifting, as we're seeing with the closure of the Bay and Foot Locker and as well as Bootlegger. The city does have an economic development department that helps incentivize retail and business within the community. But in regards to the Woodgrove area plan, we will have policies in the final document that will relate to trying to bring a mix of different type of retailers into the environment, so that when redevelopment does happen, we have that right mix to create a complete community. And it's a little bit more challenging in this context because it is a regional center. There is quite a large draw for these larger retailers as opposed to more local retailers. So we're going to have to balance that mix of ensuring that there is the retail needed for those residents that are living within the Woodgrove Urban Center in the future, as well as those that will be coming from outside of the scope area, which is currently how it's used right now.
And your report identifies that close to 80%, 78.7% of the retail space in that area right now are chains, big chains. What can the city actually do? Like, what is a tool that you could use to change that, if that's something that is even desirable to change?
So one big changes coming through city plan policy is a shift towards requiring mixed-use buildings. So currently, if a redevelopment were to happen, we allow single-story, single-use buildings. Hence why we see so many of these chain retailers with these very large building footprints and very little residential. City plan speaks to, in order to create a complete community, we need more people living there. And in order to do that, because we have a finite amount of land, we need to start rethinking the way that we are redeveloping these sites. And a large part of that is looking at requiring a building to have retail with residential above it, to shift away from a large areas of surface parking, which is very common for this area. We have upwards of 90% of the study area covered in pavement. That is a previous planning practice that is very common across many jurisdictions across Canada and the US. But now we're shifting towards moving away from people using their vehicles and offering other options in terms of walking and cycling and other modes of transportation, including transit. In order to do that, we need to shift the way these lands are redeveloped so it's more welcoming for people to want to walk and bike within that area. And so this will slowly occur over time. When redevelopment happens, we will have new design guidelines that will look at how do we achieve all of these goals that the community wanted to see through a redevelopment process.
Now, as you say, it's not like we're starting from scratch. The report identifies that pretty much all of the area is already developed. And when these lands are privately owned, you don't necessarily control when something is going to be redeveloped as a city or who's going to come to you and say, hey, I have the money to try and do something new with this. How do you create guidelines that would create the kind of more inclusive community that we've identified that we want, but aren't so restrictive that no one would be able to afford or be incentivized to come and say, hey, let me do this?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And what's really exciting about this plan, it's a relatively new approach for the city where we are working in tandem with our transportation, our infrastructure, and our parks and recreation and culture departments to really determine when redevelopment happens, what are all the building blocks to creating a complete community? Because it's kind of like a puzzle. Every redevelopment, we don't control when redevelopment happens, but when it does occur, and if it were to occur, the Woodgrove Area Plan will provide a really great foundation for determining how to achieve that vision. And it will make it really clear for the public exactly what will be required from the development community and how that will be achieved. And so we'll be looking at what is the costing of this redevelopment? What is the best type of housing for it? What are the transportation upgrades that may be triggered as a result of this redevelopment? What are the infrastructure upgrades that may be required? What are the access to daily needs that may be required that aren't currently there? And the Woodgrove Area Plan will have policies. It will have actions to determine how to create that. So it'll be really all laid out within this plan for everybody to see and to create a really clear path forward on the expectations as redevelopment occurs.
What are some of the infrastructure needs of the area? So we've talked about already, I know it's only a target, but 18,000 new units of housing in that one chunk, that section of town. What does that do to the infrastructure? If there's someone listening to this and thinks, man, every time I go to Costco already, it's mayhem trying to find a place to park and it's a stressful concrete jungle. And we add, a third of we add 33% of the housing in the entire city of Nanaimo on top of that in that small area. How do we cope with the roads and transit infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera?
That's a really good point. We did look at, through our baseline report, that generally all the intersections are running at acceptable levels. There are some challenges at peak times, but generally, things are flowing quite well right now. And if we start to add population, what does that mean? And so in phase 2 of this project, based on what we heard from the community in phase 1, we're going to be testing 2 to 3 different types of scenarios based on different growth rates. So if we add, let's say, 1,000 people or 10,000 people, what does that mean in relation to the impacts on transportation network, on the infrastructure network? And so we'll be looking at that in phase 2 to see what are the implications. And we're already aware, because of city plan policy, that, we've heard from the community, they want to see a shift in the types of modes that are offered. And so Metro Drive is a really great example where that road offers transportation options for various modes of transportation. That's a similar shift that will likely happen as redevelopment happens. But there will be trade-offs, and we'll be looking at those in phase 2 and seeking feedback from the community on those trade-offs and how they want to move forward.
In the area right now, 0 schools, 0 parks, 0 recreation and culture facilities. We've already talked about how all of the land is kind of already accounted for. How do we change some of those numbers?
I will say that although all of the lots are developed, if you look at the actual building footprints, which are available on our Get Involved website, you'll see that there's actually a lot of land that is just taken up by surface parking. So the highest and best use for that land really isn't there. There's a lot of potential for redevelopment. Even if you were to retain those existing buildings, there is a lot of potential for redevelopment. And we recognize that there's a need for parking. However, with the new transit-oriented area bylaw that the city was required to pass as part of the provincial housing legislation, there is no longer a requirement for residential parking within 800 meters of a transit exchange. So there may be that shift occurring with redevelopment where less parking will be required, plus the mode shift. But when it comes to those amenities that you mentioned, I do want to make it really clear that there are schools and there are parks very close, if not directly adjacent to the study area. And those are really, really great right now. We're just looking directly at the boundaries of the Woodgrove Secondary Urban Center. And within that boundary, there are currently no schools, parks, open spaces, recreation, cultural facilities, which means there's a really great opportunity that through redevelopment, we can negotiate for those amenities, and we can work in partnership with the school district to determine what those needs are. And so that when redevelopment does happen, it's very clear in the plan what are the types of recreational cultural facilities the community would like to see, what type of school is needed. Is it an elementary school? Is it a high school? Is it both? Is there opportunities to partner to have these centers as one joint building? This is all the kinds of questions we're going to be asking in phase 2 and 3 of this project, so that once again, when redevelopment does happen, we know what the community wants, and we can then negotiate to ensure that those amenities are brought into the actual Woodgrove Urban Center.
We've talked about how the area has been identified as a major transit hub. According to the report, 85% of people, the way they get around is with a vehicle. Only 5% of people, the primary way they get around is transit. What actions can the city take to change that in a way where more people are taking transit because it is more convenient and better and is a viable option for them?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Currently, the transit exchange is located on the Woodgrove Center site, and it's not centrally located within the Woodgrove Urban Center. We are looking through phase 2 of this project when we're testing scenarios. Is there another location that is more centrally located that plays in tandem with the transit-oriented area regulations that the province has implemented that allows for very high densities directly to transit? And the more people that live directly adjacent to transit, the more of them that will be using it, alongside with this shift in the transportation network. So we are working in partnership with the Regional District of Nanaimo, as they are responsible for transit within our boundaries, and determining the best way to try to improve ridership for this area.
You've got public engagement open on this right now. If people want to share their 2 cents, I understand even if they don't live in or even necessarily near in Nanaimo, that part of town, they're welcome to do it. Can you tell me what you're looking to hear from people, where they can go, how they can take part in this?
You bet. So we currently have a survey open until Monday, April 7th. And the purpose of the survey is, one, to share the results of the baseline report, and then seek your feedback on those results. And because that's going to help us inform what kind of scenarios should we be testing for phase 2. And I want to make it really clear that we're building off what we heard from City Plan. We heard really great feedback from the community. We have a really good sense of the type of building forms the community wants to see, the densities they want to see, but we just need to refine that vision a bit more. What makes Woodgrove a unique place? And because this is a regional center, I myself, I don't live within the area, but I transit there quite often. We want to hear from you, and we want to hear from the residents that live within the study area, because this is, the gateway into Nanaimo when you're coming from the north. And so there's a lot of great potential for it to become even better than it is right now. And so you can go to our Get Involved website. You'll see the Woodgrove Area Plan project page. We have information about the objectives of this project, the scope. You can see, if you fall within the study area, and the survey link is there as well. And we have all of the background information. The background report is all on there. All the information is on there. And you can also subscribe to get updates on the project as it evolves, because we have 3 more phases to go. So it'll be really great to hear from everybody from the community.
Kasia, thank you so much for coming down to the studio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kasia Biegun works in the planning department with the City of Nanaimo.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
We're digging into the future of the Woodgrove area on today's program. The city is currently refining its plan for the neighborhood with an eye towards adding density and diversity in the coming decades. Michael Bassili co-founded the community planning advocacy group Strong Towns Nanaimo. I got in touch with him to talk about Woodgrove.
Hi, my name is Michael Bassili. I'm the managing director and co-founder of the little group called Strong Towns Nanaimo in beautiful Nanaimo, British Columbia. We are a nonprofit organization all about building people-oriented places and advocating for people outside of a car, people who want to live in denser housing, people who want a more livable community. And we've been around for over 2 years now. We've grown quite a bit, and we have had the pleasure with engaging both with stakeholders outside of the city, so developers, architects, business owners, and as well as planners and engineers from the city itself and the district. So it's been a fun time.
And I am curious to get your take on the Woodgrove area of town. The plans are being made for a huge transformation to that area in the next 30 years. What do you think needs to happen there?
Oh, that's a loaded question. There's a lot to be done there. So I think it's incredibly important to kind of set the stage. Back when Nanaimo was initially founded, it was called the hub city. We have if you look at a map, it kind of looks like spokes from a wheel, right? You have the centralized downtown core with care being taken into where people live and how they commute to and from their downtown home to their downtown business or grocery stores, doctors' offices, the basic foundations of life. Cut to the auto era after post-World War II as Nanaimo sprawled up north. We get essentially the exact opposite of the way we used to build things. We get Woodgrove is kind of the personification of that. Unlike the sort of walkable, permeable spaces that you have in a place like downtown Nanaimo, Woodgrove is incredibly challenging to get around without a vehicle, without a personal vehicle. And that affects not just people who don't drive, but also people who do drive. Businesses and homes become pushed further apart. The space in between these places where people spend their time are occupied by impermeable concretes. So that presents not only environmental concerns, but also like general health and livability concerns for the people of North Nanaimo. And there are lots of benefits, of course, to living in North Nanaimo. We have tons of nature in Nanaimo. We're quite lucky in that respect. And there's lots of transit facilities, such as the Woodgrove bus loop, the bus station there in Woodgrove Mall. But the space surrounding it is incredibly detrimental to the livelihoods of people who want to spend time in these places. You have to essentially get out into your vehicle, commute over a bunch of asphalt, and get to the inside of a building and walk around. The space around it is essentially a moat. And if you want to think about it in urban planning terms, the space is gated off with the requirement of a personal vehicle. And obviously, that might have worked 50 years ago. It's not working so much for us anymore. And we as a community have known this for a long time. It's not hard to find people complaining, even if they don't understand the vocabulary of urban planning. They can understand that Woodgrove feels weird. It doesn't feel like an inviting space. It feels like something is lacking. Once you leave the mall, sidewalks disappear. Once you get off the bus, for instance, sidewalks and community spaces disappear. If you're riding your bike on Metro from downtown up to the north, it'll spit you out into a giant parking lot. So there's no sort of end of travel facilities there for people outside of a vehicle. If you're in a vehicle, it's also incredibly distressing and uncomfortable. Lots of lanes of traffic, lots of conflict with other drivers, lots of odd driveways and strange corners and massive intersections. Um, if you make a checklist of every detail that the Woodgrove has included, every one of them has a potential opportunity for change and improvement. And to your point in the beginning, the Woodgrove area plan that the City of Nanaimo is currently building up, and they're conducting public outreach right now. This is an incredibly important and exciting first step for the City of Nanaimo to remediate the sins of the father and build better for the people who absolutely deserve it. And there's a lot to love about this new plan.
So you're a fan of the plan. The plan, if we were to cut to 30 years from now and the plan has achieved some of its goals, it's got a target in there of putting more than 18,000 new units of housing just in that one small section of Nanaimo. For context, again, the entire city right now has 43,000 units of housing everywhere. And they're thinking the target, 18,000 new units. How do you think that area could accommodate that kind of density?
Absolutely. I think at its core, it's a land use problem. We don't have to get into the massive densities of, like, let's say, a high rise to accommodate that many people in a space the size of the Woodgrove area plan. For context, for those who don't have a picture of what the Woodgrove area looks like, if you look at a map, it basically spans all the way to the edge of the north, bordering the district of Lanceville. If you kind of pan to the right, it kind of begins or kind of ends right past like McGurr Field, McGurr, that area off Dover. And it also encompasses all of the southbound part of Woodgrove Mall, including about half of Metro. That also includes like Green Lake, Tweedsmuir, Parkwoods, all these little sort of subdivisions and suburbs kind of surround or kind of hug Woodgrove. It's actually quite an expansive area. And a lot of that area, just based off of the way we have zoned our city, is essentially underutilized urban space. There's this idea of latent demand that I always like to talk about in terms of housing, where you have zoning regulations that maybe say that this particular lot will be a single family home and it will always be a single family home. To change that would be, incredibly tumultuous and tedious and expensive for the owner or maybe a developer. So typically those houses will become single family homes forever until demand gets so high and the cost of land gets so high that now it's financially viable for someone like a developer to buy up that land and build, incredibly high density building. You see this in big communities like Vancouver. That's always the poster child for high density development in the Broad Peninsula. But you see it a lot more in in Victoria and Nanaimo now as well, in downtown Nanaimo. We're kind of reaching the stage where the land we currently have is, in a lack of a better term, underutilized. We have lots of people moving to North Nanaimo for work or for play to settle down. Lots of the existing housing stock is spread apart. We have large lots, lots of wide setbacks, separated by wide roads. Lots of parking lots and surface parking lots are incredibly poor use of land. I think people always say that they want more parking, but when you show them a place that has tons of parking, like Woodgrove, they don't really want to hang out there so much in the parking lot. So there's always this trade-off, right, of how do we kind of build up and use what we have better. It's, unless we expand into the ocean, it's going to be challenging for us to reclaim more land. Lanceville is to the north and to sort of the left, if you look at the map. You also have the RDN on the side as well. So expansion outward, it's probably not a good idea to begin with, but we need to think about how do we take what we currently have at our disposal and make it better. And what we've already seen, if you look at sort of the corner of Island Highway and the Parkway at the very tip of Nanaimo, right off of Mary Ellen Drive, where that new roundabout is, you see the sort of beginnings of that. Parking lots and vacant land is being turned into medium density housing, like 4-story apartments. And kind of look a little odd right now next to large scale parking lots, but give it the 30 years and it'll feel a lot more coherent. A part of redeveloping and allowing for this gentler density in these zones is increasing the permeability of the people who live there. And what I mean by that is increasing the transportation options for residents. So we're talking multi-use paths, better cycling facilities, better transit facilities, cut throughs for through cul-de-sacs, that sort of thing, to allow people to kind of flow through the neighborhoods a lot more freely, and to connect them to shops and services that they wouldn't have had access to without a vehicle in the past. It's we're very lucky that we don't have to look too far in our general region to see examples of gentler density that can accommodate the thousands of people that the city is saying that they want to accommodate in this area, in the Woodgrove area. If you imagine the moat of parking around Woodgrove Mall, even a small sliver of that can accommodate a few thousand people with just a couple, like a four-story low rise. And if you imagine shops at the bottom as well, that could help get people out of their vehicles and have them service their daily needs more locally versus having to force them to drive across town to go shopping, for instance. A lot of these neighborhoods in the Woodgrove area plan are also essentially the lowest density that Nanaimo could offer in terms of zoning outside of rural communities like Cedar. So if you think of Dover, there's only single family homes essentially in the Dover neighborhood. They're relatively large, and there's nothing really around them other than pavement. So even two or three amalgamated lots can turn into hundreds of houses and housing suites for people in the area. And when we hear this, right, that you have the thousands of people who want to move into these spaces, a thousand's a lot of people. When you hear that number, it kind of elicits an emotional response right away. But the reality is, we're already living next to developments such as these day to day, and it doesn't really cause much of a concern. Nanaimo's already in the past 10 years been building smarter, denser forms of housing all across town, not just in the north end, but also downtown. So it's not uncommon now to see duplexes next to single family homes, next to a three-story walk up, next to a five-story low-rise apartment building. These things sort of the texture of our city is changing and has been changing for the past decade and will continue to change. So applying what we've already been doing really, really well in Nanaimo, applying that to a place like Woodgrove, which has lots of land that is ripe for sort of better redevelopment and better connectivity, I think is going to be a slam dunk, especially if the city can continue to build out the infrastructure required to service all these new residents.
How does the city get some of the private sector players, the people who own some of the commercial retail space, maybe the people who own the land that right now is predominantly concrete parking lots? How does the city get those players on board with changing that built environment?
Absolutely. So there are a couple of sort of approaches the city can take. In the city's own survey, it actually elicits some questions from residents as to what do they think the city can do to help promote these small scale neighborhoods developments that people see that they want. There's small scale neighborhood commercial, for instance. So how do we make these things viable? And the city's own bylaws sometimes are very counter to these sorts of small businesses that we want to appear in our city. Like if I wanted to start a coffee shop, for instance, I would need to add a certain amount of parking per square footage or per table. And in a place that's already mostly parking, that we're trying to sort of ameliorate by a reduction of parking and adding more homes and trails and sidewalks and trees, that bylaw becomes a counter to what the actual desired outcome is. And so the city, to give them credit, is currently undergoing at the same time a parking review strategy that we've actually been engaged with a lot with them. First stage of that is obviously the elimination of parking mandates in the downtown primary urban center. The next stage, which was indicated to us and more publicly through the parking review survey, is that we want to talk about urban nodes such as Woodgrove. Woodgrove is also a transit-oriented area as designated by the province. So there are already parking mandate reductions surrounding these transit hubs. But if you really look at that sort of concentric circle where the transit hub actually is at the mall, that doesn't cover the rest of the Woodgrove area plan: Dover, Metro, Parkwood, all these places. So having a sort of understanding that we need to be more flexible with our bylaws in the way we mandate parking setbacks, height variances, things like shadow surveys, all these little bureaucratic hurdles that might hinder a small business coming and setting up shop somewhere in the Woodgrove area. I think that would be an incredible first step. And something that the city can do to kind of step in a little bit is I'll offer sort of expedited subdivisions of things like Woodgrove Mall. The owner of Woodgrove Mall in the past has expressed some sort of desire to redevelop in some form. And with that understanding with the owner of these large properties, we can start to subdivide and build up residential communities. If you think of Nanaimo North Mall right now, the surrounding parking lots of Nanaimo North Mall, or Rutherford Mall, as lots of people still refer to it as, are being turned into low-rise developments. And they fit really well in the community. And the parking that they're essentially replacing was incredibly underutilized, hence the land use shift to housing. And it's not hard to imagine that same transformation happening in the Woodgrove area, kind of carving out the underutilized space, subdividing those parcels, building them out a little bit stronger, and building more resiliency into the neighborhood itself.
Infrastructure is getting more and more expensive to build. I think it's a fair question as to whether the budgets as currently constructed and the tax system as currently constructed even allows the city to support the infrastructure it already has. For example, the figure that is cited is it costs $2,000 for a linear meter of sidewalk, and the city's typical annual budget for that allows maybe like 200 meters of new sidewalk in the entire city every year. How can we possibly pay for all of the infrastructure upgrades that would be required to make this plan a reality?
That's a really great question. And I think the answer comes down to um, the reason cities like Nanaimo, these suburban cities, have struggled to pay for infrastructure remediation and improvement is directly proportional to the amount of suburbanization that these cities have. It's incredibly hard to charge what infrastructure actually costs to an individual homeowner who has a single family home. In contrast, when you add density, you're subdividing a parcel that might have had three single family homes into one that has 100 lovely condo units that are also selling and also paying property taxes. When you spread that cost vertically as opposed to horizontally, it unlocks a lot of revenue for municipalities, not just in Nanaimo, but every city that is kind of going through the same exercise. And it answers a big question that a lot of people have in Nanaimo is why don't we build things like Victoria or a city like Victoria? Victoria can't sprawl. It simply cannot sprawl. It has water on the bottom and it's surrounded by surrounding municipalities. So it's been forced to build denser housing in a more compact footprint. That has unlocked a lot of taxable benefits to the municipality. So they can have fancy bike lanes and sidewalks for without much without much sort of without drawing too much from the city coffers, irrespective to the population. We also have a population of about 100,000 people, but as you mentioned, as the city will happily tell you, we struggle to build just basic sidewalks, let alone bike lanes, let alone bus shelters. As developments turn over, and we're seeing this right now across the city as single-family homes are being redeveloped or subdivided. There are two sort of financial components the city can leverage: ACCs, which are amenity cost charges, and DCCs, development cost charges. Amenity cost charges are a financial tool that local governments use to collect funds for amenities such as community centers or rec facilities. That can be directly applied into new infrastructure projects in the municipality. So in Nanaimo, as we develop these underutilized parcels of land, we collect those charges. DCCs are very similar development cost charges, and they're mainly for infrastructure expansion. So if you think of new sidewalks and new bike lanes, one of the main ways Nanaimo gets new sidewalks is through redevelopment. And so, as part of the answer, it's not going to be a complete answer, and this is municipal finances are quite the tricky problem to solve, and we have incredible accountants and financial planners at the city of Nanaimo working on this right now. But you will unlock a lot of financial benefits to the city if we proceed with something like the Woodgrove area plan, getting out of that mindset of subsidizing rural developments as a municipality is kind of key to this. If you've ever heard of Urban 3, they're a consultancy out of the US. They do a lot of municipal financial analyses. When they have these really cool 3D heat maps of where parts of the city are making money and where parts of the city are losing money. And without fault, every city they've analyzed, the downtowns are where the money is generated and the suburbs are where the money is being lost. And the reason for this always comes down to density. And so kind of remembering that we don't have to get as dense as, let's say, the Burrard Peninsula or downtown Victoria, but even gentler density, 3, 4, 5-story low rises. That is such an improvement financially to municipalities like Nanaimo that we will be able to pay for a lot more than we are right now with just surface parking lots that don't pay much at all in terms of property tax.
Do you anticipate there's going to be pushback from the development community to things like the kind of DCCs that would be required to pay for some of the infrastructure we were just talking about?
Absolutely. And I've spoken to developers and architects about this as well, because obviously the implication here is that we're offloading the implicit cost of infrastructure to the development community versus having the city foot that bill or having the province foot that bill, the feds. And so where does that kind of play into the sort of complex equation of redevelopment in a city like Nanaimo? And our counter to that, as our group Strong Towns Nanaimo, is our counter to this, is that there are ways to reduce the development cost overall for a project while still allowing a developer to provide the money the necessary for a bike lane or a bus shelter. One of the most obvious ones is parking. Underground parking is incredibly expensive. It's about $100,000 per stall for one single stall underground. If you can imagine, a 5-story low rise might need hundreds of stalls, so the cost will inflate like crazy. And when we're talking about these urban centers, like Woodgrove, for instance, if you're building a 5-story low rise in the vacant parking lot in Woodgrove Mall, Woodgrove Mall has a built-in transit station. It's also in the TOA, which is great. It's already parking mandate exempt. But you can kind of see where that cost is going to translate. You're essentially trading off the desire and the financial need to include something like personal vehicle parking in favor of something like a DCC or an ACC contribution to the city to pay for infrastructure. It's a balancing act, of course, and the finances are different in different parts of the Woodgrove area itself. But it's not hard to kind of identify easy wins for developers. If you were going to say redevelop large swaths of parking lot right at the mall, that's an obvious sort of win. You could say maybe we can add a quarter of the parking that we maybe would have added in a far-flung area that doesn't have transit. As we kind of radiate further out from the Woodgrove area, let's say we go all the way to Dover. Yeah, Dover's transit access isn't that great, but you can sub out, some parking potentially for car share. Other communities across British Columbia do this all the time. They essentially negotiate with the city and say, hey, we'll add 2 dedicated moto stalls if we reduce parking by X amount. You still get that public amenity in terms of transportation infrastructure. You still get the DCC and the ACCs, the cost the city are going to collect essentially to rebuild some infrastructure, whether that's widening water mains or building sidewalks, doesn't really matter, whatever the neighborhood needs. And then you also get a more, I guess, walkable, less auto-oriented developments. Because when you start to tell developers, hey, the whole paradigm of building our cities just for cars is over, well, now you can be a lot more flexible with the way you design your developments and the way you design your connections to and from the neighborhood. So I mentioned permeability before, improving access by adding pedestrian paths through developments. Think of, maybe you instead of having one large rectangular parcel where you have one long apartment building, you can have 2 with a pedestrian path or a multi-use path right down the middle. Now you've essentially allowed the developer to include their public amenity, their public infrastructure amenity in the form of a trail that connects to the broader neighborhood. But you're also, that also kind of bakes into the development itself. The residents get to use this path as well. So it's kind of a win for both parties. It's not perfect, and you're always going to have developers who kind of brush up against costs. With our engineering standards in Nanaimo, we have guidelines for how wide sidewalks have to be and what kind of bike lanes can be on what streets. This is not unique to Nanaimo, of course, that we have pretty standard numbers in terms of what we ask of developers, but it's a bit of like whatever the city can do to streamline the process and be understanding of the development community while also keeping in mind the needs of residents. I think that's the sort of the fine line that the city is walking and all municipalities are walking right now.
This feels like a sort of unique conversation compared to other ones where we're talking about adding density, because instead of talking about a neighborhood where tons of people live and have lived for generations in these single family homes or whatever, this is mostly just concrete. This is mostly just shops. There are a few people who live there, but relative to what they're talking about adding, relative to the percentage of the land that is not people living there, it feels completely different. What is the potential for opposition? Like I'm thinking of typically you might see public hearings on adding denser housing. There are a lot of people who live in the neighborhood who have concerns that this might radically change their neighborhood, the character, the feel of it, etc. But this feels like a different situation. Do you anticipate there being people who are maybe living in other parts of town who are worried that this is going to seriously inhibit their ability to go and do the shopping for their family at somewhere like Costco or Superstore or whatever, and they're worried that they might not have a way to get to those places, to park, a way to, maybe they need their vehicle to carry all of the hundreds of dollars of groceries that they need to get from one of these big box stores in a way that would be hard to do, like on the bus.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an incredibly good point that you're making here. Unlike a traditional redevelopment of a neighborhood that exists that has lots of residents, yeah, this is a lot of greenfield development and a lot of concrete. You will absolutely see at every public hearing the city has, regardless of how uncontroversial it is, you will always see people come out from far-flung parts of town to complain. That's a and as someone who doesn't work for the city, I'm allowed to say that with a cheeky smile. But it's true. I mean, public hearings attract people who have opinions, who have lots of free time, and maybe those people don't like that Woodgrove might have one less parking stall. That being said, I think it's important to remember that where the foundation for where this plan is coming from is city plan, is the official community plan that we put out a couple of years back. That had broad engagement for years, citywide. We all came out and we all went to these workshops. We all filled out the forms. This is an incredibly comprehensive community plan. It's a really great document if you haven't read it. And it's available if you go to getinvolvednanaimo.ca/Woodgrove. There's a link to the official community plan there for those who are interested or those who are new to Nanaimo who weren't a part of this plan. So at a municipal level, obviously, if you are holding a public hearing and you have five angry people who want to park their 17 trucks at Woodgrove, that's a valid point. Sure, I could see that. They have lots of groceries or wood or whatever they're hauling around. But also, you have 100,000 people, give or take. A large proportion of those people have engaged the city directly in a much more formalized way to say, hey, we actually want more housing. We want more transportation options. We want better transit. I want to feel safe on my bike. I don't want to have to drive to do everything. I want a sidewalk in my neighborhood. I want to live closer to where I work. These are all direct quotes from the OCP. These are humans in our community who say, hey, this affects me and I want it to get better. And that is the sort of bedrock of where this desire is coming from. So keeping that in mind is key. They do have a benefit, of course. There are not going to be people right next door, more or less, saying, hey, the shadows are upsetting me. Get a shadow study done. I don't want this development in my community. You might have that in like some of these built out areas like Metro or Dover. Sure, it's unavoidable sometimes, but they might get away with a little bit less backlash in places like the Woodgrove kind of core itself. And in those places, I think groups like Strong Towns need to kind of push for more progressive development there because now we have the opportunity to do so. Like this is a chance for the city to really get creative with the way they rebuild. The city themselves has said that the auto-oriented development of the past is unsustainable. It's not financially tenable. It's not good to live in these places. It's expensive to maintain these places. The city says this. The city says this themselves in their own OCP. So there's a broad recognition here that things need to get better. I think now is the sort of the perfect opportunity for the city, both staffers and people in the RDN, people who are advocating for change, to step out of their shell a little bit and push for exciting new development potential, build cool new plazas, build a cool new bus loop, experiment a little bit with the design of our city because this is pretty rare. We have essentially a blank canvas outside of a large mall and some parking lots. We can do a lot with what we have. and there's so much space to do so. It's just about getting the right ideas in place and getting people excited about change. I think Nanaimo, and I never grew up in Nanaimo. I came from a bunch of other cities. But one thing I've noticed living here for almost 5 years now is that there is an undercurrent of I guess cynicism with the way we develop, the way Nanaimo was developed. A lot of people have been told plans in the past that we're going to be doing X, Y, and Z. We're going to be doing the terminal nickel reimagined plan, 10 years ago, and it never really came to fruition until just recently, where they just started working on Terminal Avenue. So people have been told a lot of really exciting plans in the past, and they haven't really come to fruition. What I'm saying as someone who, again, has not lived in this community his whole life, is that this kinds of momentum that is happening, that exists within the city right now, is unlike anything that was there before. So many people are sold on the idea of a reimagined Nanaimo. That's why the plan, the OCP, is called Reimagined Nanaimo. It's because we have all this latent pent-up excitement for what the city could be. And we have the money for it now, and we have grants coming in from the feds and the province, and we have, as I mentioned before, as density is being built up in our community, we have more money and more tax base coming in. So all these sort of dominoes are lining up. So if my message, I guess, as a group, Strongtown's official message here is get creative with it. Like, I think people, you'll always have opposition here and there, but I think people will really resonate with a more livable secondary urban node, because that's what we explicitly said we wanted in the OCP. We want something exciting. We want to be proud of Woodgrove. This is a northern gateway. The exact quote from the city plan is, Woodgrove is our urban center and our city's northern gateway. Let's actually treat it like a northern gateway. Let's make it a beautiful, vibrant place that people actually want to come and visit, and not just where Costco is. I think this is the opportunity, and the time is now. I think this is a time to be excited.
Michael Bassili, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Michael Bassili is co-founder of Strong Towns Nanaimo. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
This program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.